Hello, Calaveras County, and welcome to another episode of Mondo Calaveras. I'm your host, Mike Taylor. You know, just before we turned on the cameras here in the studio, my guest this time and I were saying there's almost nothing that happens in Calaveras County that doesn't involve the Calaveras County Planning Department. Planning Director Peter Maurer, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, Peter. And like we were talking, it's as if we just don't stop piling on to your department, isn't it?
Well, it sure feels that way sometimes.
I can imagine. I guess let's get the big one out of the way first, the general plan. Where do we stand with that little darling?
Well, I am waiting every day for the final version of the final EIR. We're working out some minor tweaks. You know, there's been some change in case law and CEQA requirements from state law that required us to do a little bit more work on the EIR. We're just about ready to release that. I don't want to make any commitments to a date because every time I do it bites me in the rear end. But I am hoping that we will get it going really quickly.
And once that's released, then kind of what is there a timetable that sort of kicks in, or does it still sort of
There is a timetable, at least one that I have. It's the next step would be planning commission hearings. I want to give the commission at least a month to review all the documents. So assuming we get it done within the next week or so, we'll be starting hearings in May. I just said that out loud. No one quote me, please. But that's my goal. I don't know how long the Planning Commission is going to take on it. They could take some time. The board could say, you've had enough time. We want to hear it now. Once the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, then the board will hold their hearings and take a final action to hopefully certify the EIR and adopt the new general plan.
Now, obviously not to trap you in a corner or anything, but is there a chance, not to predict the future necessarily, but I mean, might the Planning Commission get into the general plan and just start chewing and rehashing everything? Or has enough of this been moving along that everybody kind of knows where the ducks are lining up?
I would like to think so and hope so, but we have a new Planning Commission. The old commission back in 15 and 16 took 15 months to review. They went line by line through the document. There is at least one member that's still on that commission, but most of the other commissioners are new. They'll have their own ideas and policy choices. They may make some changes. Hopefully it won't be significant.
Be quite that long.
Yeah.
So and actually part of the general plan is the housing element too, isn't it? And the draft of that was just released here in the past couple of weeks, right?
Right. So the housing element is on its own sort of separate timetable. Under state law, we have to update it every 5 years. And every year the legislature gets a little more constrained with their purse strings or trying to do that with an adequate housing element. So we want to be very careful in meeting those timelines. We have until this summer to get it submitted and approved by the state. We actually submitted it to the Housing and Community Development Department Monday. And so they have 2 months to review it, 60 days to review it. We should be getting something back towards the end of end of May. Once they say, yeah, it's good, or here are the changes you need to make for it to be consistent with state law. And the housing element law is probably one of the most complex and detailed components of planning law. It's the only part of the general plan that has to be approved by the state. And every year the legislature piles on more and more requirements.
What kinds of things, I guess maybe for viewers, let's go back to square one. What is the housing element? And then what does that document kind of do for us?
So in a nutshell, the housing element is identifies trends in housing and in population and demographics and how the county is working to meet the housing needs of its citizens. And so we look at the full range of income levels and housing that can be that could accommodate those. So we look at everything from very low up to above moderate income. And usually the market covers the above moderate without a problem. It's the low, very low, and moderate income housing that's the challenge.
And that Calaveras County doesn't have a whole lot of right now.
Well, and just rental housing in general is hard to find pretty much anywhere in rural California.
Yeah.
But you know, and we're no different than the other counties. We also look at things like special needs housing, homelessness, farm worker housing, temporary employment housing, those kinds of things as well.
Okay.
And so we're looking at, you know, how do we try to constrain the costs of housing?
Okay.
Do we have adequate land appropriate to, you know, zoned and planned for housing? And then incentives for the private sector to build that housing.
Okay.
The toughest thing we have right now is the cost of construction exceeds the value of homes that sell here.
Yeah.
And that's been the case since 2008 when the economic crash hit.
Market crashed.
And that's why you just don't see that much construction activity, and certainly not a lot of subdivision activity going on in the county right now, because you know, no one's going to invest money in something that's not going to pencil out.
It's not going to make the money at the end of the rainbow. Now, the housing element, once everything is sort of taken into consideration, and this is my ridiculously layman term, but sort of thrown in the blender, and what is the state looking for to make sure that you say you're going to have 58% of your population at low income and you don't have 58% of your housing as low income? Is that the kinds of things?
Well, they look at our demographics, and they look at, you know, census numbers and projections by the Department of Finance. And every 5 years we get what's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, RHNA.
Okay.
And so that is sent to every regional part of the county. And some of the urban areas like the Bay Area have the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG. And it's made up of 5 or 6 counties and 30 or 40 cities. SACOG in Sacramento, similar. Our COG, the Council of Governments, is Calaveras County and the City of Angels Camp. So it's pretty easy for us. We know pretty much where the distribution
where everybody is.
Otherwise, it's sort of a fight between the cities and counties who is supposed to get their fair share of housing. So once we get that number, then we look at our zoning, the land, and there's a land assessment that says, okay, we have sufficient land zoned with adequate infrastructure or the ability to provide infrastructure to build the housing. And that's always been enough. It's like, okay, we have the land available. It's up to the private sector to build it. The state is pushing, and there's new legislation going on right now that's saying if you don't actually construct the housing, not you, the county, but if the housing isn't actually constructed, we will withhold money for roads, for all other kinds of programs. There's a lot of pushback on that, obviously, from the cities and counties.
Yeah, because the cities and counties can't go out and build a subdivision.
We don't build housing. We try to accommodate it. So the other thing we look at is, you know, is there anything that we can do to reduce those constraints? You know, fees is always an issue that's brought up, and no one wants to pay fees, and we try to keep them as low as possible, but we also have to pay the bill. So there's a trade-off there. Some of the other things, you know, with state law, and we always seem to be running up against state law requirements, is that, you know, we can't charge more than what it actually costs us to provide a service. And so for us to subsidize the construction of housing, it means it comes out of the general fund, which is the taxpayer dollars. And so, you know, we don't want to do that. So that's the push me pull you that we are constantly fighting with the state on the mandates that they have and the things that we can legitimately do.
Do you, as a planning director for a relatively rural, relatively small population county in the state, do you see those state requirements as becoming cumbersome for our size county, or are they kind of coming along in line with what the universe needs for housing?
Well, there's definitely different. Yes, it's cumbersome. It's cumbersome from everyone, not just rural counties. The problem is, you know, the population, you know, base is, you know, Southern California and the Bay Area, and there's a lot of housing issues there. I mean, you know, a house that would sell for $350,000 here is probably $2 million in the Bay Area, at least parts of it. And they're really feeling the housing crunch. And so a lot of the efforts to address housing needs statewide are sort of focused on these really big problem areas. But it's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't necessarily work. So I'm part of a group working with the legislature through the American Planning Association, the Rural Counties, Regional Council of Rural Counties, I think it's called, I can never remember what that acronym
Oh,
stands for.
RCRC.
Yes.
Yeah, Rural Council of Rural. Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Rural Council, Rural
Counties?
yeah. Something like Rural
Whatever.
Council, Regional Counties. I remember.
Yeah.
Yes, I know just what you mean.
And
Sorry.
the California County Planning Directors Association.
Oh,
and
okay.
We were working with a lobbyist from RCRC and SACOG, the State Association of Counties, to lobby for reasonable legislation. We understand there's an issue, it needs to be addressed, but let's not create more of a problem by trying to solve a problem here and create another one over there.
And not to get tied up in pointing fingers, but are we finding that some of those metropolitan planners, I guess we'll say, government officials are, hey, my district needs this, so we've got to add that to this?
Not so much. I think, as planning officials, we all sort of work together. We understand that we have different needs.
Sure.
It's the legislature, the elected officials, in Sacramento that sometimes don't understand that what's working in San Francisco doesn't necessarily work in Calaveras County or Del Norte or someplace like that.
Yeah, okay. As you see the draft housing element for Calaveras County, did you see any glaring holes, or would those have been things that you would have fixed before that draft was released?
Well, that was the work that we've done for the past 6-8 months, is work with a consultant to go through it. There's been a lot of changes in housing law this past legislative session, so they're familiar with all the updates in the law, so I worked with them to update our requirements. It's not a whole new element, it basically is an update. So we looked at what we had, these programs are working, we need to tweak this a little bit. We've actually done fairly well considering the very slow growth that we've had here. A part of it was a lot of the rebuild from the Butte fire, and we're still really facing a struggle there. Only about 20% of the homes that were lost have been rebuilt.
Wow.
And what we also discovered was that we really have an issue with homelessness here. It's not just an urban problem. We had a very aggressive count. Every year we do what's called a point-in-time count, and that was done in January. We counted at least 200 people. It's not official yet, but that's the unofficial numbers was in the range of 200, where a year ago it was 16.
Wow.
That number is really critical because we get federal funding for that, for housing, assistance and a lot of health and human services programs. So we're looking now at trying to work with other county departments to develop some programs to address homelessness. So that's something that we're probably looking a little bit more aggressively at. We've also worked very closely with the Stanislaus Stanislaus Regional Housing Authority, which is a multi-county region based in Modesto, but it serves Calaveras County as well. That is actually looking at building some moderately priced housing.
That's right.
Housing.
Didn't it purchase property here in San Andreas?
There's an old subdivision that's been recorded. The roads and infrastructure's in, but nothing was built on it. So they're going to build a series of houses there. They're also looking at another site, Cemetery Road off of Goldstrike. For another small project. So those are sort of in the early stages of development. But that's pretty exciting. And when I say workforce housing, I mean people like me, well, maybe not me, but my staff, teachers, firefighters.
The folks who have the jobs and could afford to rent a place, but can't find that place. Right. That's really been the trick. And has it been that way in the county since even before the Butte fire? To me, it was kind of feeling like rentals were getting pretty tight even before the Butte fire.
That's definitely true. And I think what we found was that the Butte fire exacerbated that. There was already a problem. Another thing that's going on, and particularly in places like Murphy's, a lot of housing is being converted to vacation rentals. And that's a problem anywhere where there is a large tourist activity. And it's, we want to encourage the tourism and want to provide accommodations, lodging, but at the same time, when it starts taking away from the affordable rentals.
Folks who need to live here.
So that's something we'll probably be needing to address in the not too distant future.
Now, something that I would think that the housing element leads right toward is new developments in the county. And with the downturn in 2008, I mean, like you said, new construction virtually stopped. And it seems like some is percolating out there. Is it people, redoing their decks and that kind of thing, or are we seeing much new construction getting planned in the county?
I don't remember the numbers, but I think we're gradually increasing. When I started here, I think the number of new permits, new residential permits was in the 20s. Per year. I think we're up around 100 now, but I could be wrong with that number. But it's gradually increasing.
Yeah.
Some of that may be rebuilds from the big fire, but I think there's just a very gradual increase. We were in negative population growth for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
We've just sort of turned that corner starting in 2016.
Okay.
But over the next 20 years, we're only looking at about 3,000. A growth of 3,000 based on state projections right now.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of people coming here. And so the demand for housing isn't that great, other than the people that are here are already looking for housing.
Yeah, who are already looking for housing. So are there new subdivision plans crossing your desk now? It seems like that would sort of start to percolate even before we start seeing new construction and new homes built.
Before the homes are built, the lots have to be created.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is a lot of these older projects sort of being dusted off. The biggest one right now was the Saddle Creek project in Copperopolis. It was a large-scale project, 1,600 homes. They're scaling back a little bit. There's about 500 lots created, about 300 houses out there right now. That had what's called a development agreement, where the developer and the county sort of agree to, the developer is going to do certain things, the county will promise to do certain things. That expires this July.
I see.
So we're working to try to get this project through the process before that expiration. But there's, it still has to go through the process.
Yeah. And are they looking to add housing that kind of fits into the I guess I'd say the mid-range of the price range? Because a lot of Saddle Creek is pretty pricey.
Yeah. And I think, the bulk of it is still the upper end.
Okay.
There are some condominium lots being created in parts of it. So it's a mix.
Yeah.
But it's probably more geared towards the upper end, just because that's the nature of the golf course.
Yeah, and that was the nature of that project
Right.
even when it started.
Right.
So, are there any others in the county that are?
There are a few others. Let's see, we recorded one not too long ago in Copperopolis. There's a couple in Valley Springs. And again, most of these are older projects that have been on the books for a while.
Sure.
The unfortunate thing is some of them are expiring. We had one guy come in the other day and said, gee, I want to, I'm interested in pursuing my map. We said, I'm sorry, but it expired 2 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
And so he's going to have to start over again.
So then they have to go back to square one and file a whole new, what's called a tentative parcel map.
Well, a tentative subdivision map.
Subdivision map, that's true.
Parcel map is 4 or fewer lots. Anything over that is...
That's right, yeah. Back to my title company days, like I told you. What is the biggest challenge in the planning department right now? What are you guys kind of butting your heads against the walls with right now?
I don't know if there's anything that we're really butting our heads against the walls with. We've got, the biggest thing is an outdated zoning code. It needs a comprehensive rewrite.
And is that tied to the general plan? Or
yes,
no?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Really, we have made changes, for the last, umpteen years. But to really look at it comprehensively, we need to get the general plan done first.
Oh, I see.
The next step will be to update the zoning map to conform to the land use designations of the general plan. And then we want to start looking, and I haven't really decided whether to recommend to the board that we just start with a whole new, complete rewrite of it, which will take a number of years as well.
Yeah.
Or we take some targeted approaches on some of the real problem issues that we're facing.
Okay.
And so that's something. But, it's outdated. It was, written originally back in the 60s. It was sort of a comprehensive update in the early 80s. It's been piecemealed approach since then. And there's just a lot of things that don't really apply to today's world, and even some conflicting requirements. One part says one thing, the other says the opposite. Well, what do we do here? So, those are some of the things that I'd like to
just
address.
out of curiosity, as Joe Citizen, when that happins, who makes the decision on what actually happens?
Well, it depends. In some cases, it's me.
Which office you're standing in? Or?
I have the responsibility and authority to make that determination.
Sure.
Of course, anyone can appeal that decision, which we just had the other day at the Planning Commission. So they can appeal my decision to the commission and ultimately to the Board of Supervisors if they're still not happy.
Yeah.
In some cases, the code actually says the Planning Commission has the authority
Oh, I see.
in this
Okay.
section. Others, ones that says I have the authority.
Okay. And then there's that issue in Calaveras County that we thought was going to go away and now hasn't gone away, and that's cannabis.
Yes.
And I know that the supervisors haven't yet officially said, okay, here's what we want to try and do, but where is your department in sort of what sounds like is brewing a little bit in the...
So back in January, the board, or not February, I guess it was, had a study session on cannabis, and the majority of the board said, we want staff to work on a regulatory ordinance, so reversing the ban. Now they haven't adopted it yet, so we're just sort of working in the early stages of that. We go back to the board in 2 weeks on the 16th with a follow-up study session to sort of go through some of the requirements of what they would like to see in an ordinance. Which zones, what minimum parcel size, what are the setbacks, all those kind of details that need to go into an ordinance.
That was always, to me, the part that felt like, I mean, when you get to make the first set of rules that anybody's going to follow, it would seem like you could make those parameters almost anything, and then you could come up with a plan that most people in the county could live with, it would seem to me.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to do right now is, we learned our lessons from the urgency ordinance. It was, too much, too fast, too small of parcels, wrong zones, those kinds of things that, hopefully we can address properly. There's always going to be people that, on both sides of the spectrum that think that, hey, we ought to have it as wide open as possible, and others that, we should, keep it out altogether. And that's the difficult part of the board, to try to, what's the expression, to thread that needle to find the right compromise.
That's good. I was going to say compromise your way through it, but and obviously this will all come before public review and all that again before we get there. But so in a couple of weeks, is there a chance that a draft ordinance will be put together this year, or?
I think that's what the majority of the board would like to see. That was the indication I got, that they understood that it was not going to be something we could push out really quickly. We need to take our time. We need to do it right. We've got to work with what the state regulations provide. There's a lot of competing interests. The sheriff has concerns, code enforcement, the district attorney, public works. Everyone has concerns and issues that need to be addressed in an ordinance, as well as sort of the political reality of how much wants to be done.
As an ordinance like that makes its way through the county, is it sort of this is obviously a very simplistic mindset for it, but a binder that, and there are the pages that law enforcement will check off, and there are the pages for the auditor controller, and there's the section for farm advisor? Or?
There will be sections that will be specifically if not necessarily written by the sheriff, certainly reviewed, very critically. I'll work closely with our county counsel to make sure we have a legally,
defensible document.
Thank you. That was quite the word.
Darn legalese terms.
Well, I just something that makes sense, that actually works. That that doesn't have those conflicts I was talking about earlier. And then, but there's certain departments have concerns, whether it's the ag department, whether it's environmental management. So those, they will look critically at those sections, and hopefully it's a meeting of the minds that we can all come to. In some cases, the board may be going in one direction, and someone from a department will say, we really don't think that's a good idea. We advise you to do something different. Ultimately, it's the board's decision.
Is there much input from people who might end up being growers that's taken into consideration at that level? I know once we get to the Board of Supervisors or the Planning Commission and it's talked about, the public stands up, but is there much talk with the public?
We haven't had a lot of conversation, this round with industry. I'm sure that the different board members have. In some counties and cities, they've set up committees, advisory committees, that law enforcement and the cannabis industry and homeowners associations or whoever might have an interest in it to try to work out some of those compromises. Whether or not that's something the board chooses to do or not is still sort of up to the board's decision.
You're waiting until they wrap the gavel for you. Peter, we're getting down to our last couple of minutes, and I realized that we hadn't really talked about the size of your department. How many employees do you have? And
I've just recently hired 2 new people,
Okay.
a planning technician and a planner 1, really great, energetic young people that I'm really happy to have on board. So I have an administrative assistant, helps me with budget and all the paperwork stuff, 2 senior planners,
Okay.
2 planner 3, 2 planner 2s, a planner 1, and a planning technician.
Okay.
So what's that? 8, 9 altogether.
Okay. And is your office mostly people from the public coming in to see you, or it sounds like there's a lot of other folks from government that are coming to the planning department to
most of our traffic at the front counter is the public.
It is the public.
But we do work very closely with other departments, with state agencies, even federal agencies. One of my Planner 3s has really become an expert on the mining regulations of the state, which are massive, and the FEMA requirements, the flood insurance requirements.
Oh, wow.
And so I rely on her a lot to
Did she help get rid of those dreaded homeowners insurance policies?
Well, she was very instrumental in fixing the problems we had with the old.
Thank her for me. And when the public is coming into the office, what is the majority of the questions over the counter that they're coming to you for?
It's usually just your day-to-day things. I want to build a house. I want to do an addition. I want to start a business. Where can I locate it? I want to work out of my home. Can I do that? I want to sign off on a business license. Pretty much routine stuff. They're looking for property to buy. They want to build a retirement home. What's the zoning?
What's the zoning?
Just,
and they're looking at that zoning so that they can maybe work out of their home, right?
In some cases, yes. Yeah. If you've got a business, you've got this grand idea. I'm going to make my living doing this. I would say just come into our office and find out if you can do it from there, or where you need to locate in order to do that business.
Totally off the wall question for you that just came to me as we were talking about this. Can just about anybody with their house anywhere in the county open it as a vacation rental? Are there any sort of regulations that prevent them from doing that?
We allow, with the exception of Lake Tulloch area, where we have a special ordinance that just applies to Lake Tulloch. Someone can rent out a room in their house, or rent out the whole house as a vacation rental. There are no restrictions on that.
Okay.
If you have more than 1 guest room, it's considered a bed and breakfast. Which has different regulations. And anything over 5, I believe, is considered a motel or a hotel.
And then you really enter into the planning process, and you have to follow
the bed and breakfast inn requires a certain kind of permit, and obviously a hotel or motel needs to go in a commercial zone.
And that's why we ask the expert. Peter Maurer, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
You bet. So folks, when you come to that planning department, I think we said it last time, be nice over the counter. These people can help you out. Peter Maurer, thanks for being here. Next time, I'll see you here on Mondo Calaveras. Until then, I'm Mike Taylor. Enjoy.